I'll interpose discussion times throughout this whole thing so we can have a conversation about it, and then kind of a wrap-up discussion. Then we'll be doing traditional sexual morality. After this week, everything now goes into ethical issues. Everything will go into ethical issues. Okay? Any questions for me? Okay, cool. Let me finish up with what we started. So the traditional point of view, we said in the Vatican in 76, and we talked about this, that genuine caring, sincerity, respect, commitment, and fidelity or loyalty are all important parts of relationship, whether you hold to the traditional point of view or whether you'll see when we do the libertarian point of view. Okay? Therefore, they conclude, fully human love does not stop at romantic love. It naturally evolves into parental love. The human love is made complete by love for children produced by that love. These facts are what set us apart from animal sexuality. They're what give human sex and sexual relationships their special dignity. That is Aristotelian basis until we get to this. This is the first value judgment. Therefore, to engage in sex without love, or to engage in sex not open to the possibility of procreation, is to engage in sex that violates our essential nature and dignity. And this goes back to what Aristotle says. The most essential aspect of nature of all living things is reproduction. One species ceases to reproduce, they cease to exist. So the very essential nature of all living things is reproduction. How do you reproduce? Well, Aristotle says there's an essential nature to reproduction. In the mammalian context, you have two parts, and if they fit together correctly, then you get procreation. If you don't get procreation. If you don't get procreation, you just cease to exist as a species. So Aristotle's promoting nature. It's just obvious in nature, if you don't have reproduction, you don't have a continuation of the species. The church gets a hold of that and adds moral value to it. That's where we get traditional sexual morality. So Aristotle is not inventing traditional sexual morality. He's talking about nature. The church gets a hold of it. It has substance, nature, procreation, how we go about all living things. They all have the same thing. You need a male and a female component. The essential parts go together the right way. You get reproduction of the species. Okay? Okay. Let's qualify it a little bit before I go on to libertarian. So these are important. Therefore, they say all sex outside of marriage is wrong. Why? Not because reproduction is necessary in marriage, but reproduction produces offspring, and offspring need to be raised. In our particular case, to engender values that go beyond the time that you spend within the family. So for them, intercourse must occur within the bonds of matrimony, because there's children that are produced and they need to be raised into the same set of values. The view that everything in nature has a purpose derived from Aristotle and Aquinas, and the purpose of human beings is to engage in fully human love, which must accompany sex and be conducted within marriage. So, we're going to get married tomorrow. So the night before, since we're going to get married tomorrow, the night before, according to the traditional sexual moral tradition, can we engage in intercourse? No. Because the whole point of it is not to enjoy it, although it's an enjoyable experience. The whole point of it is to procreate. And if you procreate, you have to be responsible for the production of offspring.
Didn't at one point I was trying to lay out that it was, I mean, not to get graphic, but missionary position, you know, you did what you did and it was done.
You did what you did. And it's gone through a lot of it. That's a great point, Crum. As you go through a lot of iterations. When we were doing John Stuart Mill, and there were 6 objections to it, and I didn't go over them because I got caught up in something else, and frankly, you didn't see that on your quiz. I just wanted to expand a little bit on John Stuart Mill. In John Stuart's Mill day, he was competing with a queen named Victoria, Queen Victoria, the Victorian age. And it was a very stilted age. people dressed from here to here. There was no flesh that was allowed to be seen, and women laid on their back and didn't enjoy it. Your job was to reproduce the species. And people accepted that. Those were the values. That's the box that they grew up in. So in 1492, Chris takes off in his boat. You know Chris, right? The Columbus guy. He discovers the New World. He comes home with 3 important items. He comes home with gold, he comes home with chocolate, and he comes home with bananas. Well, he went to Spain and delivered the product, and eventually it made it across the English Channel into England, and the Queen said, welcome to the gold, welcome to the chocolate, and she refused to accept bananas because they were too phallic in appearance. It's a very, very strict little box that they grew up in. Yeah, absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. And we talked about this. After the fall of Rome, the Catholic Church becomes a repository of all known knowledge. Knowledge is power, and he who has knowledge controls the perception of how that power is supposed to be interpreted. Okay? And they're not the only ones. We're still doing it today, people. Anyone who has access to power can control. You do make the mistake, I bet, of probably believing everything I tell you. Not that I mislead you, but I have a perspective like you do. Remember, we went through that. We went through subjective and objective points of view. Everyone's condemned to their own perspective, their own subjective way of looking at things. And while I try and mitigate that and not promote that or make that the standard or the value that you have to accept, it goes along with all of us. None of us can eliminate it. It's just part of who we are as human beings. We have built-in predispositions to how we see things. Okay. Teachings rely on natural law, which provides objective standards for how people should behave. That's what we believe. Values are innate in human nature. That's what they believe. Human reason and divine revelation are used to recognize and develop these values. Values are immutable. That means they can't be changed. And immoral, premarital sex, having children outside of marriage, homosexual acts, masturbation are all taboo because they violate the basic tenet of procreation. So if you accept that, you understand why it is that they promote the values that they do. Ethics equals what? The law. Those that have their hand on the mechanisms of the law can turn the moral compass any way they want. So forever, the moral compass has been, in this particular context, the Western context, has been determined by the traditional sexual morality. And then in 1698, John Locke comes along and says, I think we're missing something. People have rights to be free and to express themselves the way they want. I can swing my elbows as much as I want, as long as in swinging my elbows, I don't come in contact with your nose. And so we get to libertarian political values. For libertarians, sex is like any other activity. It's an activity. Let's just accept that. It is an activity. There are standards for morality, and they are no different, except they have standards that apply to the idea that people are allowed to express themselves and do things as long as it doesn't interfere with anybody else. If it doesn't harm you physically, if it doesn't harm you emotionally, psychologically, if it's not an interpersonal infraction on your freedom, according to libertarian political philosophy, you should be allowed to do what you want to do. So there's 5 standards that they hold to. Now, this doesn't do away with genuine caring, commitment, fidelity, those things. These are just aspects of what libertarian sexual morality adhere to. Number 1, as long as the act involves no dishonesty. So I have a friend up north, there are 2 of them, Terry and June. They were young, they were in college, they're both freshmen, and they fall madly in love with one another. I mean, they really fell in love with one another. And as they began to, I'm assuming you all know this, when you fall in love with someone, you immediately make plans for the future. You know, you can kind of see the future unfolding the way you want it. So they began to make these plans, you know, and they wanted to be married and they wanted to have children. But June said, Terry, this is real important. You do not get me pregnant until I graduate college. You could be in an accident and die. You could get a disease and die, and I need to have a future. No problem, Terry said. I've had a vasectomy. The doctors can reverse it when we want to have children. Liar, liar, pants on fire. But June was just as ignorant as Terry was, and so Terry promised her not to worry about it. So they didn't worry about it. 13 months later, the first towhead arrived. Towheads are little white-haired kids, you know, blonde-haired kids. I was a towhead when I popped out of the oven. And June was ticked. 15 months later, the second towhead popped out, and 13 months after that, the third towhead popped out. June was, eh?
So Jesus.
Yeah! Right! And June was ticked, and she and Terry had it out, and they managed to work through it. It happens sometimes. They worked through it. Junie ended up getting her education. Terry's still alive. They have a really good family, yada, yada, yada. Terry lied. We talked about honesty, didn't we, on Monday? How important honesty is in a relationship. And especially when you make promises that, when broken, have radical effect on a personal relationship. How many of us want to live in relationships with people who aren't honest with us? Honesty is one of the foundational commitments we have to one another. If I can't take your word, I don't want you. In any relationship, there's just friendships too. When you get to be parents, don't give your word if you're not going to keep it. Everybody understands the value of a word. Are we going to go to the ball game? Oh yeah, sure we will. Oh gee, you know, something else came up. That's called strike one. So honesty is incredibly important in the libertarian political philosophy. Why? Because you're free to do whatever you want to. You don't have to give your word. When we went through deontology, I told you I rarely give my word anymore, because I give my word all the time, and then I can't keep my word because I forget how many times I gave my word. And when you can't keep your word, what happens to your relationships with people? Yeah, so I have 4 or 5 people want to go out with lunch with me this week, and I said, don't forget to remind me. Give me a heads up. I'll make room for it, but give me a heads up. So no dishonesty. Number 2, no exploitation. You know what exploitation looks like in the sexual arena? Come on, honey. You love me. I thought you loved me. Come on, what's the problem?
Would that also constitute prostitution?
Well, exploitation is more playing on people's emotions, because we have this interrelationship with one another. And so you pressure people. It's an exploitation of love or feelings that we have for one another. Yeah, well, you know, I want to wait, and that's it. But come on, baby. I thought you loved me. And you're exploiting someone's feelings, which is different than...
Isn't that manipulation?
Same kind of thing, exploiting and manipulation, absolutely. But it's based on an inherent connection you have, but not respect for one another's. Well, I don't want to swing my elbows yet. But we exploit those emotions with people. And in the libertarian sexual morality, you don't exploit between people. You have to respect that everyone's an individual, and they have the right to say yes, and they have the right to say no. In the modern era, we even get to the point where if you're involved in sexual activity and someone says no, they mean no. And you need to respect no. Number 3, no coercion. Now in the day, way back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, it was expected of a woman to save herself for her wedding night. It was a big deal. In fact, some religions required that on the morning after, I don't know if I should tell you this or not, on the morning after, the family got to go in and inspect the bed sheets to make sure that the woman really had not had intercourse with anyone before, that her hymen had broken and there was blood on the sheets. It was required. It was a religious right. You could demand it. And yet coercion these days is, what do you mean you're a virgin? No one's a virgin anymore. It's none of your business, frankly, but coercive factors can get into play. Both male and female. Let's not just think it's just female. You know, males no longer, well, you know what I'm talking about. And as long as it doesn't violate any obligations to others.